30th edition of Back Roads of Illinois. We were Central Illinois agriculture source, and in the Midwest alongside in Central Illinois agriculture, we're glad you're here with us. Our guest today is Mike Zulolo from Global Commodities in Atchison, Kansas. We were talking with him about the commodity prices and Brazil's agricultural supply, inflation. What's going on with the U.S. economy with Mike? The planting season is slow in central Illinois because we had wet weather for last weekend. We'd watching the storms with some heavy rains. It were flash flooding and wet conditions. What's going on about the Farm Bill in Washington, D.C. between back with the Title I and SNAP program, CPR program? I've been thinking about the CPR program. We need some new CPR to the farmers in the Midwest because the wetlands is being attacked by the legislation to begin to tagging the farm with the pond or dishes or by the field in the farm and other assets as well. Otherwise, we are watching for this situation in Washington, D.C. between the state of Illinois. This is your agricultural news on Back Roads of Illinois. SF, get ready to start working other setback to be effective in airlines like Southwest, United, Delta. However, there is a sliver line of work for SAF and demand for the production of the ethanol industry. Colombia banned to import of the U.S. beef with the 8th state with the bird flu in Kansas and Texas alongside in Michigan as well. Otherwise, Colombia is not our biggest customer come with our agricultural products. Wheat futures is soaring to the highest possible for a long time since Ukraine war in the markets for today's market. It went to be down for a little bit until last week. According to the Department of Agricultural, shipping is freed from Russia and Ukraine. We were going to talk with Mike. Welcome to Back Roads of Illinois with Mike Zulolo from Global Commodities in Atchison, Kansas. How are you, Mike? I am glad you're here.
I'm glad to be back with you, Cesar. Thank you for the invitation.
Let's start with our conversation about the grain market after the closed bell and demand to shift from in Brazil. Could you explain to our listeners about these things that are going on?
Yes, and it's probably appropriate to say that commodities do involve substantial risk of loss, and performance is not indicative of future results when it comes to these markets, Cesar. And I think that's especially given the case of all the noise, all of the factors that we have running in these markets. The end of April today was probably the biggest factor, along with the heavy deliveries for some of the major commodities like soybean oil that were driving the trade. It seemed as though that those issues, along with talk about the Federal Reserve and the money flows, the currency markets, the new April lows in the crude oil market and WTI, those seem to overshadow the continued degradation of the crops in the hard red wheat belt. The big thing that I think needs to be mentioned here as we get into May now is the kind of the start of the first domino that fell in this chain of break to the downside these last couple days. Coming back from the weekend was an increase in moisture for Russia. Looking at several different professional analysts and meteorologists, And looking at the maps myself, the amount of rainfall that Russia is looking to get over the next 10 days in like 100% coverage of their driest areas may not be much more than a half an inch. And so I think between the French crop being delayed in terms of corn planting and issues with their wheat crop, what's happening with Russia and parts of Ukraine, and then what's happening here in our country in the hard red wheat belt, especially, I would suggest to the listener and the viewer that this weather market in Russia is probably not done at this point, even though the market kind of has acted like it the last couple days.
Yes, I saw that it went down Terrasburg today, especially in the corn market and beans.
Yes, now the corn was able with zero deliveries and a fairly strong cash market and still a lot of uncertainty about South American production. May corn was able to close back up on the day, which I thought was very strong in light of the fact that the hard red wheat had double digit losses. Soybeans, as you say, had double digit losses. I would say, though, when I look at this market in the big picture of what has turned the price action around, it has been a wheat led market like I was hoping it would be. I think it has more to do with not just the weather, but an overall change in trade psychology by the funds that the supplies for the 24-25 marketing year were going to be increasing, and we were going to add supplies this new crop marketing year versus the 23-24 marketing year. If that's the case, then I think we may have done something more important than maybe what we're thinking right now, as far as maybe making a low that we can build upon. And so when I saw the closes on Tuesday's trade as we closed out the month of April, I found it very important that both the hard red wheat and the soft red wheat were able to close higher on the month of April and stay strong compared to the March closes. And I think that was very valuable, along with the fact that, as I said, that May corn was able to go positive on the day as well and finish a lot better for the month than what it looked like during the middle part of the day.
Mike, how is the corn and beans in Kansas for this planting season?
Well, we in Northeast Kansas, where a good chunk of the production is grown without using too much irrigation, we had tremendous yields last year. And in fact, many clients north of Atchison towards the Iowa border and towards the Nebraska border, and even east towards the Missouri border, were able to register record corn yields last year, and in some cases, even record soybean yields, Cesar. So I don't think we're going to see that kind of a yield spike again this year because the planting conditions haven't been as ideal. We have been graced with some really good timely rains. Some would say maybe too much at this point, depending on how much more we get this week. We could be seeing some washouts in some fields here if we get as much rain as expected between now and the end of the weekend. I think we're on track for an above average crop in this part of the country, but not a record crop like we had last year. Now, the crop conditions and planting conditions will vary very much here in this part of the country as you go west of Kansas, or west of Atchison, I should say. We're still extremely dry in major parts of the Corn Belt of Kansas, say down closer to Hays and south of Hays as you get down towards Garden City. Kansas is split up in its Corn Belt a little bit more than Illinois or Indiana. And so you quickly leave the hard red wheat belt and get into the Kansas Corn Belt. And as you go west and even into eastern Colorado, you find quite a bit of corn and soybeans still. And my understanding is spreading a spiroplasma, which is, I think, commonly called a corn stunt disease. The expectations that are coming out now that we've gotten into harvest, the number I saw, I think probably about 4 days ago, 5 days ago, was that we were approaching 30% harvested in corn in the country of Argentina. My understanding is from both colleagues that I have in Brazil, who have colleagues in Argentina, and also from just the general news of what we're getting from some of the major grain exchanges like the BAGE, is that we're going to see 30, maybe 40, maybe even 50% losses in the yield in some key provinces of Argentina, like Chaco, like Santiago del Estero. That's another one where 40 to 50% yield losses in corn are being registered right now. And so this is where, when I look at South America, Cesar, in general, I'm more prone to being of the view that the USDA is much too high on corn production for both Brazil and Argentina, while they probably have the soybean production for both countries fairly well locked in. They may be 2, 3, 4 million tons off when it comes to the soybean crop, say for Brazil in particular. But I think in the case of the corn crop in Argentina, their last number was 55 million metric tons, taking it down 1 million from March. They could be easily 5 million tons too high in Argentina. And in the case of Brazil, my current number for Brazil is about 115 million metric tons for corn. USDA came out in April and their WASDE at 124. And so you're talking about 12, 15 million metric tons potentially on the table here of what USDA is going to have to come down in corn in comparison to the beans. So I think the supply side, to me, would say South America is not going to be there to be as big a competitor on the corn side of the equation like they will be in the soybean side. And I think this is one of the most important pieces of the puzzle when it comes to the May WASDE report. We'll get brand new 24-25 supply demand forecasts for the first time from USDA, but it's going to be extra critical, in my opinion, to keep track and keep an eye on both the Brazil and Argentine corn production figures, because they could join wheat in that the world stocks to use ratios for wheat currently are now at 10-year lows. We may be talking about the corn stocks to use ratios being at 5 or 6-year lows if USDA slashes both Brazil and Argentina's corn crop.
Yes, it is no good for South America and Brazil's soybean production.
No, that's right. And I think with the soybeans in particular, one of the big things that I've been implementing and integrating into the analysis as far as hedging and selling the soybeans has been the currencies. Because Brazil has a substantial supply, I think, in terms of production, and because China seems to be slowing down in terms of their overall demand from the United States for soybeans. I think the currencies play a bigger role this year than they did last year. And it's going to be very important that the US dollar doesn't spike or go sharply higher and appreciate against the Brazilian real. I think that could really hurt us in terms of selling power. Obviously, how our currency in the dollar reacts with the Chinese currency, it could really impact negatively the Chinese buying power. So I do see more pitfalls potentially for the soybeans in terms of lower prices. I've said for most of this year and a lot of late last year that if we're going to see soybeans go higher, at this stage, I think we're going to have to see the corn and wheat lead the soybeans higher. And to be able to get November beans back above $12, $12.15, I think would probably be an issue where the corn and the wheat would need to be leading that market higher at this stage.
Just read my mind about the currency, Mike. What is your sources for Brazil's currency of the Rios? Could you explain to our listeners?
Yeah, the last 3 months, and you really have to keep an eye on these currencies because they move for different reasons, is what I've come to realize, Caesar. The last 3 months, the Brazilian currency, the Chinese currency, and Latin American countries and also developing world countries like Argentina and Brazil back then that would work with us on our monetary policy. I don't see that as much. In fact, the BRICS economies are starting to grow bigger and bigger in size, and population that they are over, and they seem to be more in sync with one another than they are than we are with them like we used to be.
Would you like to go to tell us about the bird flew in your neck of the woods in Kansas?
Yeah, I
There any
wish.
more case of the HPI?
Yeah, I wish we didn't have to talk about this. I wish we didn't have this on our list to talk about today. I was hoping that we would pass this issue because the more we have this issue come into the news, I think the more the funds take notice of it. And the latest news of the ground beef being tested in by USDA is extremely troubling news to me because 3 weeks ago or so, when this issue started to rear its head, I started telling clients and subscribers, I hope the agencies in power can get ahead of this issue because around between 10 and 20% of the beef supply that we consume as far as hamburger or even prime rated or prime graded steak meat is coming from the dairy herd nowadays. And there's actually genetics that have been developed to create a dairy cattle herd that both provides milk and can grade very well and can get into even the prime sector in terms of grading and certification because of the genetics that we've built up over the last decade or so. So I'm thinking right now we've got 10 to 15% of the total beef production that we consume or we ship out in the export market is coming from the dairy side. And so this does impact the beef equation, the meat side of the equation. And it's especially troubling given that we're getting ready to go into summer grilling season. So the ground beef being tested is the last thing we needed to hear about. What I really want to hear right now is that there are no samples that have tested positive for the HPAI in the ground beef. That should put to rest the idea or the issue that I think the funds are worried about right now. I'm certainly worried about it, about more countries other than Colombia halting their beef imports from the United States. Because if we start to see more countries halt their beef imports from our country, that just means we have more beef that we're going to have to consume domestically, and it's going to create a bigger supply here domestically. And we've had terrific beef exports these last several years. We don't want to mess this up.
Unfortunately, but it is a pretty important thing for ranchers and a beef producer.
It absolutely is. And it's nice that you bring this up because since moving from Indiana to Kansas, I do appreciate more what the ranchers have had to go through the last 6 or 7 years between the drought and the disease and other animals having issues that the cattle have been impacted on price wise. And now we've got a very low herd supply. And it's just been a tough, 5 or 6 years for most of the ranchers and the cattlemen and women in this part of the country, and this is not making it any easier.
Do you have any final thoughts on Brazilian production and world events? Planting season, Mike.
No, the only thing I'd say is if the listener or the viewer out there wants any kind of information from me, go to globalcomresearch.com. That's globalcom with two M's, research.com, and fill out a free trial request. Mention Cesar's show in the comment section, and I'll be happy to extend the free trial. I've got a special report out that I've done part one of an inflation special report for commodities. I'm working on the second part right now. So it'd be a good time to get a free trial if you haven't seen any of my research before.
Thanks, Mike, for the promo for my show.
It's been great to be with you, and thanks for having me again, Cesar. Take care.
This is Mike Zulolo from Global Commodities in Atchison, Kansas. We were coming back with our last segment. Thanks to Mike Zazzolo from Global Commodities in Atchison, Kansas. This time is wrapped up for this show. Well, folks, that our show on back roads of Illinois. Before I go, make sure that you can catch up past episodes or interviews for this program. Head to Back Roads of Illinois Cesar Delgado on YouTube and subscribe. You can listen it on whenever get your podcast for Back Roads of Illinois. I am Cesar Delgado. Have a great day.